Good afternoon. My name is Ella George and I'm the Chair of the Legislative Assembly's Legal and Social Issues Committee. I declare open this public hearing of the Legislative Assembly's Legal and Social Issues Committee inquiry into the recruitment methods and impacts of cults and organised fringe groups. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues who are participating today. Joining us online, John Lister, the member for Werribee, Jackson Taylor, the member for Bayswater, and Rachel Westaway, the member for Prahran, and other colleagues are expected to join us shortly. On the 3rd of April 2025, the Legislative Assembly's Legal and Social Issues Committee was referred an inquiry into cults and organised fringe groups. The terms of reference require the committee to inquire into cults and organised fringe groups in Victoria, the methods used to recruit and control their members, and the impacts of coercive control, and report back no later than 30 September 2026. This inquiry isn't about judging or questioning anyone's beliefs. What we're focused on is the behaviours of cults and high control groups that use coercive techniques to recruit and control their members, and the impacts of these behaviours. The evidence we're hearing will continue to help the committee shape practical and balanced recommendations. On behalf of the committee, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all those who've engaged with the inquiry thus far, particularly the individuals and families who've bravely shared their personal experience with coercive high control groups. Today, the committee will hear from Maria Esguerra, Director of the Olive Leaf Network, and Miriam Francis, also a Director of the Olive Leaf Network. And I thank Maria and Miriam for participating here today. All evidence given today is being recorded by Hansard and broadcast live, while all evidence taken by the committee is protected by parliamentary privilege. Comments repeated outside this hearing may not be protected by this privilege. We will now commence the public hearing, and I welcome Maria and Miriam to provide opening statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Miriam Francis. I am a resident of Victoria and a cult survivor advocate. My lived experiences occurred in Victoria and New South Wales, as well as the United States and England. As a director of the Olive Leaf Network, I provide aid to survivors of high control groups. I raise awareness for systemic harms, investigate gaps in legal frameworks, and advocate for legislative reform. My areas of focus are child rights and child safety. I see the gaps in our system, perhaps because I was a child whose harm slipped through the cracks. Australian law recognises that the child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth, and is guided by the best interests of the child, meaning that in all actions concerning children, their safety, well-being, and healthy development must be a primary consideration. The child's vulnerability demands special protection. Our laws already reflect this in many ways, providing for greater freedoms for adults compared to the limitations placed upon children's activities and exposures, such as for employment, the consumption or serving of alcohol, smoking, access to gambling, nightclubs, forms of entertainment, and there are even age restrictions on movies. The government identifies areas of risk for children, but it does not distribute its gaze equally. For children in cults, there are no safeguards. There are no ratings on their exposures. There are no restricted areas. In 1965, an inquiry for the state of Victoria found Scientology's principles to be perverted and ill-founded, and its techniques debased and harmful. But it failed to investigate what was being done to children, providing only one sentence in its over 200-page unrelieved denunciation of Scientology regarding any risk to children, stating that Scientology is potentially the same danger to children as to adults. In 1983, the High Court of Australia gave Scientology the key to unlock the gate which had been put in place to limit their activities of damaging psychological practices. And Scientology uses that key, quoting the High Court of Australia, to export their brand of deviance to other countries. I was born into Scientology in Sydney in 1984. Throughout my childhood, I experienced what the 1965 Inquiry report described, and I've included just a couple of quotes here. In auditing sessions where the pre-clear is not allowed to have inhibitions or to show reticence or reluctance to revealing and discussing the most intimate things, sexual matters, are frequently discussed at length and in startling detail. And the other quote is, "This unrestrained dwelling upon sexual topics is sought to be justified by Scientologists on the basis that such discussions are in session, as though that circumstance regularized the debased and erotic prying which psychiatric evidence described as harmful and as bordering on voyeurism in the auditor." At 8 years old, I would lock myself in the bathroom to escape the woman sorry. Okay. You got
Want me to read?
Miriam, would you
God,
like to take a short break?
I'm okay, sorry.
Okay.
Ice water.
At 8 years old, I would lock myself in the bathroom to escape the woman and her endless questioning. I lied and said I needed to pee. I ran the water in the sink while she knocked. I lied and I said I was hungry. She came back with pieces of cheese. I ran out of excuses. Back to the chair, back to the machine, back to the unthinkable questions. I held the metal cans that were cool to the touch and were connected by wires. Sometimes she'd warm them before placing them in my hands, asking if I was comfortable. I lied and said I was, because I knew that it didn't matter. Only she could say when it would stop. Back to the unthinkable questions, she used the machine to find my thoughts. I wasn't allowed to hide anything. I wasn't allowed to say no. There is no safe word in Scientology. The Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission has such gaping holes and so few guidelines that it allows organizations to financially benefit from their lack of scrutiny. Dianetics, which is Scientology's most widely distributed book, describes that a 7-year-old girl who shudders because a man kisses her is wrong because she should see nothing bad in a kiss from a man, not even a passionate one. Scientology is selling this book on our streets of Victoria, at market stalls and public events, even the Royal Melbourne Show. They are selling this book just outside of this parliament. Sorry. They are selling this book just outside of this House of Parliament. Victoria requires that organizations which provide services to children must apply child safety standards. But what if an organization does not recognize that children are children? How does the government intervene for the safety of those kids? Scientology in Melbourne, which is 6 kilometers away from us today, provides a child grooming course teaching that children are not children, that they are small adults. I know what it is to be treated as an adult in a small body, to bear adult expectations, to face adult exposures, and to have adult experiences on my child body. When the federal government supports the financial benefit from these activities, this is not negligence. It is complicity. This is institutional child abuse backed by the government of this country and the state of Victoria. Differentiation between an adult and a child is the most fundamental law in child safety and human decency. If an individual or group is unwilling to recognize that difference, they should not be permitted near children. Any venue providing adult-only, not safe for kids experiences must not have children inside of it. Any material that contains adult-only, not safe for kids material must not be provided to kids. Cults are closed-door systems, meaning that there is no one to intervene. Abuse in such settings is compounded, it is prolonged, tortuous, and has devastating consequences. Following the findings of the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, the Child Safe Standards, Reportable Conduct Scheme, and the state commissions responsible for them were supposed to provide an entrance to closed-door systems. Yet in the Jehovah's Witnesses, where the Royal Commission found complete failure to protect children, there still exists the same causation factors which allow for child sexual abuse to occur. The problem has not been solved. And I have quite a bit of detail about that, and I'd like to do a supplementary submission on that alone. So it's hard because there's so much to say, and I've only got one paragraph mentioning Jehovah's Witness, and it needs more. It needs so much more than that, and so I'd like to submit more information about that separately.
Thank you, Miriam. We'd welcome a supplementary submission.
Okay, thank you. The doors of cults remain shut, and there is no mechanism to slow the tally of child victims who are experiencing governmental discrimination when it comes to their protection. How long should we hurt before you say stop? It must be written into law that no child can be martyred. A child cannot be groomed or sexualized for an ideology. A child cannot forfeit their rights nor sign any contract or commitment which would bind them to any person, organization, group, or institution. They must not be subjected to surveillance, interrogation, or psychological or medical violation or deprivation. We need robust systems which prioritize prevention and early intervention, relieve the burden on children, and hold parents and caregivers accountable for placing children at risk. We must not limit accountability through only the judicial system, which forces a heavy burden upon victims, but through strengthening systems, including filtering charity status through an assessment of harms by the ACNC. We need child safety and child rights-focused awareness strategies linked with lived experiences to raise social conscience. We do not leave people ignorant and defenseless. We adopt a holistic approach through the health and community sectors and create accessible and meaningful pathways for recognition, redress, and recovery. We will be effective by engaging the people of Victoria and Australia and empowering our vulnerable populations. It is time to open the door on closed systems which are harming kids. Thank you.
So I'm here today with two hats. I'm a registered psychologist, well, 3 hats, I guess, with a lot of training in complex trauma, coercive control, and cultic abuse. And obviously, a director of a charity that's designed to support people to leave cultic groups, as well as a survivor born into the Children of God. Now it's called the Family International. So today I'm really going to focus my discussion on the developmental disadvantages experienced by children born into cults. Children are regularly forgotten. The constant narrative is that why do people join cults? And that's the wrong question. I know 70% of the people in the Children of God were born into it, and I think a lot more people are harmed, significantly more harmed, but a lot more number of people also born in. What the question we need to ask is, what impact does being raised in a totalistic, authoritarian environment have on the development of a child? So the continued use of recruitment and membership in the context of children is not semantic.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Maria. We've just got an emergency alarm
Okay.
taking place in the hallway. So we might just find out if this is an evacuation. Do we need to evacuate? We'll take a short adjournment and be back shortly. Thank you. Good afternoon. We will now recommence our public hearings into the Legislative Assembly's Legal and Social Issues Committee's inquiry into the recruitment methods and impacts of cults and organised fringe groups. To anybody watching at home, we do apologise for the interruption. We had an emergency evacuation here at Parliament House, but everything is all settled and we are back here today. We'll continue with the Olive Leaf Network Australia's evidence today. We also had other witnesses scheduled to appear before us. We've rescheduled Decult to 3:15 p.m. and Bat Force will be rescheduled for another day. Our committee website will be updated with those times once that's confirmed. But now I'll hand back to Maria to continue her opening statement. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to start again. Yes, so as I said, I'm here as a registered psychologist. I've got a significant training and lots of experience for over a decade in complex trauma, coercive control, cultic abuse. And most importantly, I'm also a survivor of the Children of God, which is now called the Family International. So today I really want to focus the discussion on developmental disadvantages experienced by children born into cults, because children really are regularly forgotten in the conversation. A lot of times people are asking, why do people join cults? But that's actually the wrong question. And the majority of the people in cults, I would say, are children. So the question we need to ask is, what impact does being raised in a totalistic and authoritarian environment have on the development of a child? So using terms like recruitment and membership in the context of children is not semantic. It's actually a primary barrier to protection. The language incorrectly assigns agency to a child, misclassifying a child protection crisis as a religious or a lifestyle choice. The committee must maintain a clear distinction between adults and children through this inquiry, recognizing children's particular rights and protections and vulnerabilities. And this includes yesterday's children, the ones who are living with severe challenges today or they're ending their lives. The consequences of this are immediate and devastating. I personally have lost family members to suicide. I've also had to support 5 of my closest siblings and peers just in the last 2 months with psychiatric care. 2 attempted to end their lives. In a study, cult child survivors reported to personally knowing 6.8 people who had suicide and 6.5 who had an early death, 14.8 who had attempted suicide and not completed. All of these children were born into the cult. I know the scope of the inquiry has been quite broad. When I say cult, I am using Langone's definition. It's an absolutist ideology that it dictates harsh physical discipline or the rejection of medical intervention. It's a closed and physically isolated society, often, or maybe mentally. Also, religious beliefs to justify ideology and their reclusive nature. So there's a lot of times rationalization for child abuse, as well as limited interaction with mainstream society members who could be protective. To be clear, this is not religious trauma or abuse, this is institutional abuse. I was born an Australian citizen, yet I was raised with no access to the rights and protections that I should have been afforded. This included, I never went to school. Also medical neglect. I was unvaccinated, I broke my nose, never saw a doctor. I suffered many childhood illnesses, and even my basic needs for glasses weren't addressed. I had debilitating migraine headaches growing up. As a child, I was taking care of children myself. I was fundraising. This is a clear violation of child labor laws. There's never been a time in my life that I've not been responsible to bring in finances, even from the age of 2. Time was spent in doing this work and not on my educational or play needs. I also lost my father to a treatable illness, and he was blamed for his sickness by over 10,000 members. He died confused, alone, and shunned. Having been separated from my mother and my siblings through the cult's strategic breakdown of familial connections, that is, including in the Victorian school home when I was only 8 years old, and never knowing my external relatives, this disconnect is immense. The pain is compounded. I recently found out that my biological grandparents both received the Order of Australia, which is very rare for a couple to both receive it. And the main influence in my childhood was an American criminal and a pedophile. David Berg, the leader of the Children of God cult. I call this a cultural orphanhood. This causes me to struggle profoundly, even just to feel Australian. There's a lot of focus on the abuse that occurs within cults, but it doesn't really talk about the long and complex trauma and recovery afterwards. For those of us, it's profound developmental deficiencies and neglect. If you look at psychology theories, sociocultural, ecological, attachment theories, Erikson's stages of development, you can see how catastrophic this upbringing is. For children raised in cults, it's particularly difficult because they lack fundamental developmental care and infrastructure. So to try to make it simple, I'm just going to compare an average Australian child, and of course there's a lot that grow up with traumatic, but I'm just going to compare what you might think an average and a cult child. So 2 children suffer sexual abuse, which is very common in cults. Some of my peers, I think over 77%. The Jehovah's Witness and Exclusive Brethren, over 50% from Dr. Mitten's work. So a non-cult child, while traumatized, they can potentially rely on established social and legal infrastructure. A cult child is denied all of these infrastructures to support their recovery. So an average child might be able to get support from their parents, their peers. They might even understand some of this abuse. In a cult, family structures are destroyed. Parents are enforcers, they're not protectors. Survivors who speak up, they're shamed and shunned. At 8, my mother told me to pick my nose to turn off a perpetrator rather than intervening. Moral structures, most children know right and wrong. They have a framework to contextualize the abuse. In a cult, there's a lack of moral reference system. The way I grew up, sexual assault was actually deemed as godly. And in purity culture, a lot of times it's the child's fault. Protective figures like teachers, public awareness, community and support. There could be empathy and recognition. A cult child, there's no protective factors. And after leaving, a lot of times they're stigmatized, they're disbelieved. Worse yet, many of us will never tell anyone we grew up in a cult. And I know a lot of people that have a completely secret life. In fact, that was me 1 year ago. Anka was the one, I call her the midwife. She brings all our stories out, so you'll talk to her. But I was terrified for 20 years to even tell anyone because of the stigma and the shame and because we get targeted. Loaded language in cults, there's a jargon. Basically, a cult child would learn loaded language, and it's difficult to actually communicate with other people. For us, sex was called sharing. So if I were to go to the police and said, an uncle shared with me, that wouldn't make any sense to them, but it was child rape. There's legal precedents, there's justice, and there's redress. For a cult child, legal recourse is nearly non-existent. There's also aggressive lawfare by the cult a lot of times, an entire institution against a child or a young person, decades-long statutes of limitations. There's also psychological support. There might be modalities about child sexual abuse for psychologists. The cult child, there's hardly any professional recovery frameworks, psychologists a lot of times have no training in cult-related trauma or its developmental consequences, and a sense of identity. Most children have a sense of where they've come from. They're Australian, there's a sense of who they are, safety and structure. A cult child doesn't have any of that. They miss childhood development stages. They lack a sense of belonging, even knowing who they are. They have minimal shared commonalities with the outside world, and support networks are very difficult. So when you compare these two cases, the differences to available support are vast. Cult-born survivors experience multiple and compounding traumas: sexual, physical, emotional, developmental, social, educational, and medical neglect. In a final act of violence, many times they're excommunicated or shunned for even speaking up. There's extensive workloads and adequate responsibilities from a young age, and they're left with no infrastructure to support their recovery. So we have to rebuild from zero. We have to unlearn everything we're taught. We have to deconstruct our entire worldview, and we have to deal with the basic survival needs even before we can think about the traumatic impacts of what we've been through. Many times this complex trauma surfaces when we have our own children. There's many times a deep grief for what was lost, and there's also risk of passing this on to the next generation. As a teenage mother myself, I almost lost my son to meningitis because of the cult's doctrines. He does live now with an acquired brain injury, and I'm his lifelong carer. Even though I had no access to information or knowledge or the outside world, I have to live with that moral injury every day. In 1992, the cult was raided here in Victoria. You had the information and the capacity to intervene to protect the children from the abuse and neglect. The legal intervention was inadequate. Hope for rescue was destroyed for us. Instead, the doors slammed, even more closed behind us. It set me up for another 10 years of abuse in the cult and a lifetime of extreme difficulty for me and my peers. I was one of those neglected and abused and protected children, and the critical question is, why do I have to stand before you right now and grow up, decades later, to try to compel someone to act on this crisis? The children never chose this. They're never members of a cult. They're always victims. But despite now it's been left to us to right the wrongs and fight to protect others. As Dr. Levine says, trauma is not what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us in the absence of an empathetic witness. So I have a few recommendations here, to really support. If you want to know what needs to be done, it's that infrastructure. Develop that infrastructure for children. The commitment to child safety cannot stop at the door of high control groups. Every child in this country deserves the same rights and protections. So from the therapeutic side, it is really important that we focus on like cult abuse. Really, it's a cultural competency. Psychologists have an obligation to actually learn about what they're treating and supporting people. So therapeutic training, there is a lot of really good therapeutic training. I've done training with Dr. LALSIC, Dr. Hassan, Dr. Jenkinson. I've traveled all over the world for the last 2 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars going into understanding this training. It's about attachment. Most have disorganized attachment, being 90-odd%, I think 96% of us say our relationships are impacted by having such a harmful relationships, relational trauma, complex trauma therapy, and really identity construction. So that's important. I think if we look at policies and things, there are things happening overseas and in New Zealand, particularly with the Gloriavale community, when we look at totalistic communities, it is really important that they have mandated, regular, and confidential access to independent medical and mental health care. So more of the soft services, or maybe midwives. A lot of times they have huge amounts of babies, and people coming in. We can see Willow Duffy. She's a nurse, and she works with child safety. She's got an amazing course, but she's developed a relationship. And they found out one of the practices was actually basically suffocating babies when they cried. So there could be hundreds of children with hypoxic brain injuries in that. And you're not going to find it out by putting more legislation in place, because these places, they don't care. They don't care. Like, the outside world is evil and bad, and they're the only ones that know how to raise kids. So it's a slow cultural change, and it is having those soft services going in there and finding out what's going on. It's really important that we put it and explicitly weave institutional and cult abuse into family and sexual violence policy strategies. Otherwise, it's going to just be invisible and unfunded. In the UK, they've got an amazing training called the Prevent Training for Radicalization. And radicalization really is just what a cult is. So we need to look at the systems of that. That is mandatory for all health workers and mental health workers. I think that's really, really important. I know a lot of cult survivors. Like I said, I've got 5 that have gone into involuntary psychiatric care. Those institutions are terrifying and scary for someone who grew up in an institution like us. Having to force confessions all the time growing up, we're significantly disadvantaged in the legal systems as well. I know a lot that are in jail now from the Children of God. So it's a whole round approach. We really need to teach everyone working with this particular type of trauma and the developmental, the institutional abuse, really, to understand what they're working with. And then this dedicated exit support, Liz Gregory, she's got a Gloria Vale Leaver Support Trust where she's funded to actually support people leaving. It's a refugee-style service. It's not just some therapy, it's helping people actually come out and create their life, and we're talking about multi-generations of people. I met her in Barcelona a couple years back, and she talked about her thing, and 3 of us survivors were just bawling our eyes out, and we just said we wouldn't have lost so many if Liz was there. And that's what Miriam and I aim to do. So it's really important that we also ratify the child rights, and that's right for every Australian child, adequate education, a right to choose their own belief systems, including non-belief, a right to emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual safety, and a right to their own body autonomy. And SGAs, or people who grow up in cults, they're some of the most resilient, powerful, intelligent people I've ever met, and they're hungry and they're hardworking. And we just need to stop seeing them just as victims or weird people on a Netflix documentary, but as cultural translators. We can actually bridge the gap between these insular, totalistic communities and open democratic systems. We can actually support our community and country from not going down the path of other countries right now, because we see it. I met Dr. Hassan in Barcelona, and he said, you guys are the immune system of the world right now. You're the white blood cells. You can see danger and you can tag it, because we grew up in that. We know what it's like. So being actually seen as people that are beneficial, and we can actually support you. I actually believe that the Wiamba shootings and Poor Punka wouldn't have happened if you came and talked to us and we explained to you what it's like and the mindset. We don't want anyone to go through what we did. There are still children in these environments, and there's yesterday's children who need intervention. You have the power, you have the obligation to be an empathetic witness and to do something about these health crises. It's a public health crisis. We owe these children nothing less than the full protection and support of the state. Thank you.
Done.
Thank you, Maria and Miriam, for your very powerful opening statements. On behalf of the committee, can I say thank you for sharing your own experiences with us, and also thank you for sharing some of your recommendations too. I'll start with some questions, and then I'll hand over to some of my colleagues online. Firstly, I'd just like to talk about children in cults and high-demand groups. You emphasise in your submission that children born into cultic or high-demand groups are among the most hidden and undeserved victims of systemic abuse in Australia. What can the Victorian government do to better protect children in these circumstances?
Yeah, so we are wanting to have more engagement and bridging that gap. So actually going in, I think you referred to it as like the soft approach, or yeah, it doesn't need to be heavy-handed. We just want the same equality and standard of safety that is in other institutions, and there shouldn't be any reason why that can't happen. And we just need to stop being so inhibited in the way that we go about things, like the children in there deserve equal standard of safety. So the way that can be adopted, again, Gloria Vale is a great model for that. And so we would recommend that Liz Gregory from the Gloria Vale Leavers Trust have a full hearing herself so that she can speak to the specific ways, because that is an exact example taking place in New Zealand currently and has been going on for some years. The Department of Education there has taken notice and has actually put the school on notice. So the regulatory things are coming in, but it's because there are people on the ground who are child protection and child safety and safeguarding aware. That's why we also recommend Willow Duffy as well from, I think the organization is Safeguarding New Zealand or Safeguarding Children New Zealand, as experts on this topic of how to integrate and come into a community in a gentle way that's empowering for people and that provides education. Because first and foremost, it's a cultural issue, and like you would need to bridge that gap between any culture, it's about education and awareness and working with people. You can't just go in with the heavy hand of the law.
Just thinking of my own experience, we were raided and then we were all dumped back, and then it just said, go do some socialization. And of course, we were only allowed to pick things where we didn't actually talk to anyone, so horse riding or tennis or something like that. So I just think if instead of the raids at dawn, which were the Antichrist soldiers that we'd been predicted our whole life were coming and we were told exactly what to say, if they came in and just said, hey, look, these kids, we just need to make sure they're getting educated well, and that they've got opportunities. I understand this is your lifestyle, that's good, but these kids need opportunities. And then slowly and developing and gaining our trust, they would have started to get a lot more information. They would have seen practices that were horrifying, and then we would have been able to do something, but it takes some time. But I think, every child in Australia, just like the Elizabeth Street trial, they're all in jail now for not giving her medication. So, these children deserve the right to life and the right to opportunities. So I think that's the only way we can go, because we really can't regulate adults that much. Adults can kind of make decisions, and I wouldn't want the government regulating adults' lifestyles that much unless it's illegal, but we have to regulate these children opportunities. Like, adverse childhood experiences is like the #1 risk for mental health, physical health. There's never-ending research about it. If children are having a lot of adverse childhood experiences and neglect, their life is going to be incredibly shortened and harmed.
So the other thing I was going to add to that as well is to actually step into an organization. Like, there needs to be somebody that actually is not just buying their pitch at the doorstep. But, okay, great, well, let's step inside, let's have a look. Let me open this book and see, because in Jehovah's Witness, the material that they're exposing to children is sexual and it's graphically violent. And not only that, but the children are experiencing sustained exposure. This is weekly exposure in the meetings where the descriptions and the level of detail and it is just like make your hair stand on end. And the graphic material that is in those books and their publications, the information that they're providing to children, the stories that they are telling. For example, there's one-on-one Bible studies that occur. There's 60 lessons which take place during the lead up to a child's baptism. This typically takes place over the course of a year. It's very intensive, about an hour or two at a time. It's alone with an adult and child, and the material that the child is being exposed to is incredibly graphic and disturbing. So we do have a role there to regulate that, like we do regulate any other exposures of explicit nature for children. Children shouldn't be living with these things, and then they're trying to attend school. How are they going to pay attention in class when they're also being told that it's the end of the world is coming at any moment and everybody's going to die? So how do they connect with their friends? How do they participate and connect to the education system or their future?
Okay.
Yeah.
Just got a follow-up question to that. So you spoke about a soft entry point into these types of organisations and to go softly and to educate people along the way.
Yeah.
How would a government or relevant authorities know that there was a problem that needed to be addressed? What's that trigger point for, I suppose, entering an organisation and providing that support?
I think that there should always be some kind, like there shouldn't have to be. The thing is that then you're expecting the children to self-report. And we know that in family domestic violence situations, a victim does not report until much later. Also, the Royal Commission also showed that it took, on average, 23.9% or something like that, 23.9 years before a victim would report. So there should be inquiry and conversation and interaction, which is what I would expect, for example, with the Commission for Children and Young People, who are supposed to be moderating the child safety standards for the state of Victoria, that there is an expectation that they are having these conversations, that they expect certain things to be in place, which is for a safety culture. So in writing, the policies are there. In practice and action, it's not occurring. You could use that framework as a perfect framework, that model, the child safety standards, to say, hey, well, we've got a right to come in. That was put in place so that we could have an entrance in through the other side of the door. So we need to use that model. It's in place. A lot of work has been put behind that, and a lot of research went into finding that as a solution. Yeah.
No cult member will ever report.
Yeah.
Never. Like, never ever assume a cult member will ever report. So you need external eyes and ears. And in the ones like we heard of the family, Scientology, they've got their own doctors, they've got their own, they've got everyone within that abusive system. So if you think about family violence, you don't go in front of the abusive person and ask the questions. Family violence on a cult is on an industrial scale. For me, it was like 10,000, 15,000 people in my family that were a part of that violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'll hand over to my colleagues online. Jackson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both so much for your bravery and for coming in and taking part of these hearings today. My first question was, OLN support introducing a new offence recognising group-based coercive control. How could the legal threshold for this offence be defined to capture sustained psychological domination whilst avoiding overreach into legitimate faith or community practices?
What we would look at is who benefits in this situation. I think that can provide a lot of clarity in terms of how that can be used. We contributed to and do support the submission, which is called Beyond Belief, which did describe and identify an array of harms and also identified the gaps in the current laws. An incredible amount of work and research went into that, and you'll be hearing from the primary person who did write that. But yeah, so in practice, we would see that it would make a lot of sense to look at who is benefiting ultimately. So that is not the people who, for example, I guess what I'm trying to say is that in that industrial setting, you can have multiple perpetrators, right? But then who is the ultimate person? Just like how you would identify in a criminal organization or a gang, like there are some methods already in place in terms of how do you prioritize crime and also go after those crimes.
Who's the kingpin? Who's making the money? I think about myself as a teenager who never went to school, never had medical care myself, watching my baby die of meningitis. The law is such a blunt instrument. Like, should I be in jail now? Like, I didn't have any access to other information. So I think it's really important that we don't criminalize something to the point where you're putting all the victims in jail or harmed. When I heard Zachary, Elizabeth Strue's brother, who was only 19, he never had a life outside being under Brendan Stevens' control. I was there at the hearing, and the judge said, please get a pre-sentencing report to say if there was any vulnerabilities. And he was just like, you know, the cult leader was controlling everything, and yet they've gone to jail. The children, the people who grew up in that environment, I heard he's been beaten up, he's been put in confinement because, you know, he's proselytizing in the prison. This is what I'm hearing. I'm not 100% sure if it's true, but I resonated with him. And I just said, look, yeah, the law is such a blunt object, really. You can't put the victims in jail. You have to, and we've talked a lot about with the beyond belief, it's got to be the people who set up these systems of control and harm, the kingpins, and the ones that are benefiting.
Mm-hmm. The benefit as well is a clear pathway towards like an evidentiary pathway, a way to measure, a way to document, a way to, to see where those things are going to. So, who is it benefiting is the ultimate question there. Yeah.
Thank you. And then just finally, OLN proposes a national inquiry and a permanent independent watchdog. What gaps in existing royal commissions or federal and state level inquiries make a national inquiry and permanent independent watchdog necessary, and what outcomes should each seek to achieve to bring about sustainable systemic change?
So I would say that the advantage there is being able to have that link between lived experience and government policymaking. And actually that is written into law that needs to be occurring. We have that in family violence. It's written into law that lived experiences must be engaged. And I think that's more where we were coming from, because we can see the gaps because of our experiences, and we want to be able to inform and help and support government to create these safer places. But we're also wanting that to be across a number of professionals with expertise in child safety in particular. And we've recommended a few today. We can certainly create more of a list, but that again is not just enforcing from a regulatory position, but policy making that is going to engage people and empower them and educate them, and looking at it as like a multi-pronged, multifaceted thing. Because with institutional harm, it's the entire institution. Mm-hmm. So it's multiple people, it's not a single perpetrator. And so given that is complex, there's language, there's a lot of things, we can be the cultural translators and assist and support government. That was sort of where we were coming from with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cindy.
Thank you, and thank you, ladies, for your amazing contribution today. Look, I've got a couple of questions about children being born into cults. And your parents, for example, were they recruited or were they too born into cults?
So I'm a second generation, so my parents chose to, or they joined, I guess, and they were very devout. In fact, they before I was born, they each signed a 1 billion year contract dedicating not just this lifetime, but the future lifetimes for the next 1 billion years. So the level of dedication and devotion and sacrifice that was ahead for them was what I was born into. Yeah.
And did their parents question it at the time, your grandparents? Do you know anything about whether they were very worried about what was happening? And I think, Maria, you talked about, education and lack of medical interventions. Was that something your grandparents may have had any insight into?
So, of course, we didn't grow up with relationships with our grandparents, so we have limited information about that, unfortunately. But I can tell you that in my recent relationships with my uncles, they've told me that their mother used to be quite upset when my parents would go from Sydney to Adelaide, to where the whole family was from, Adelaide, and they would just drop babies off at their doorstep, and then they would never know when they would come and return them because my parents were so involved. So my mother would travel to other countries and I wouldn't even know she was not in the country. Like, it's a complete disconnect.
And so who was looking after you at those times?
I was in institutionalized care with multiple girls in one room, sleeping in bunk beds, or sometimes we would be sleeping on cots, or sometimes sleeping on the floor. That's what.
And does that still happen, do you think?
That particular situation, I think not so much since human trafficking law has come in. So for the US, for example, because that's where I was in the year 2000, it became federal law in the year 2000. I think it came into California state law in 2001, which again was when I was there. And so Australia, as well as, they've developed their human trafficking laws. So clearly, a bunch of kids being like, living in triple bunk beds, it's going to raise some red flags. So I think over time that occurred,
And finally, so Maria, particularly, you've done a lot of work with survivors, child survivors. I imagine that some of those have parents who are still alive. Maybe some of them have left cults, maybe they haven't. But do you think any of the parents actually kind of understand if there's, people that have suicided since or that have been incarcerated, of the level of trauma that they've inflicted?
I'll answer your first question just because I think it's an important one. So my dad, Australian, he was from quite a good family, and so he ended up joining, young, idealistic, wanting to make the world a better place. That's how it all starts. So he got Hodgkin's lymphoma and ended up going through this horrible disease and shunned and not allowed to get medication. And his parents, are a doctor. So can you imagine as a doctor watching your son, who's basically completely, so that's what happens in cults. Obviously, families are destroyed. So it's incredibly distressing for people to watch their children fall down these, go into these ideological groups and give up their lives, throw away their PhDs, their education, their this. So in the US, there was a lot of things back in, there's a whole group called Free, COG, which is the Children of God. So there was a whole group that went around that. So there were kidnapping, and they were trying to deprogram, but then there was a bunch of court cases because these people thought they were going to get killed and stuff, so that was even more traumatizing to drag people out. But having young boys myself in their 20s who are quite vulnerable with autism and stuff, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to lose a child in that way and to not be able to get through to them at all. Watching Cameron on the Elizabeth Struce trial, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and yes. But do our grandparents know? Do you mean like how much harm has happened to their grandkids?
No, I mean, did your parents, so if
Our
parents,
parents know.
yeah, they've got no idea yet. Some parents may have left and may have seen the trauma. I think we've had some witnesses talk about, their parents eventually left as well.
Yeah,
But,
well, I think, there's a lot of spiritual bypassing. There's a lot of kind of like, if they're completely disconnected from this world, like they're dissociated. There's an actual DSM diagnosis called other specified dissociative disorder, and that literally talks about political imprisonment, sects, and cults. So there's an actual diagnosis of a disorder, and I'd say that would relate definitely to our parents. In the case of the Children of God or the Family International now, I think most are not living like they were, not communally. Most are in touch sort of with their kids and stuff, and they're burying their kids. Thanks. So they are, paying the ultimate price. So they know, yeah.
thank you. Thank you very much.
I would say for Scientology, I know for my friends and the children that grew up into adulthood and then left, their parents have disconnected from them, excommunicated them, and the parents are completely not connected to what's happened to the child. The parent enforces complete denial and refuses to connect with them. And then the thing is, as well, the compounding factor in that is that, and this is in my mother's own words of what she told me, and I'm hearing from many of the kids that I grew up with, their parents are telling them the exact same thing, that because they believe that it's not just this lifetime, the child-parent relationship was fractured so long ago because being told that like your child is not actually your child, it's an adult in a small body, it changes that parental-child attachment and development because they say that, well, you're going to live, bearing in mind, they've signed a billion-year contract. So the relationship to this child, this body, the ties there, I mean, they're going to have, in their mind, they're going to have other relationships in other future, and in fact, they might view, and this is in the 1965 Victorian Inquiry, this content about viewing children as like, trillion-year-old spirits, not actually as a child. And they said that this, in the report, it says it contributed to their distorted attitude towards sex and young people and children. So this happens in the family unit, this disconnect, where the parent-child, when the parent does not recognize that the child is in fact their child, the whole thing is going to be, and also we didn't grow up with our parents. We were separated early. Yeah.
Yeah, there's massive. It's really attachment issues, like massive disorganized attachment issues. So it's very hard as an adult to start to develop those relationships. Yeah.
All right. I'll hand over to Rachel. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you very much for your very brave evidence and your championing of your communities and the people that you're assisting. I'm very keen, Miriam and Maria, to understand your perspective on how we can legislate when we have the difficulty that we've identified about reporting. So we can legislate as much as we like, but as you clearly identified with children, and particularly in communities where children are born into them, and the resources and support systems around them, the doctors, the teachers, the dentists, they're all part of the cult, then how do you report? What can we do to protect children, identify issues? Because legislation is one thing, but when you've got a very close-knit group, like Children of God or the family, then it seems very difficult to be able to overcome that closed community.
Well, thank you for your question. And What I really want to avoid is trying to reinvent the wheel. We had the massive Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. There was an incredible amount of resources and witness reporting that really backed this pathway using the child safety standards. And this is really, really important. This is the pathway through that, what you're describing there. In terms of children, there needs to be someone looking in, checking in, having a look. It doesn't need that heavy-handed approach, but in policy, so they're supposed to create a child safety culture, and this is supposed to be in institutions. The problem that the Royal Commission was trying to address is the abuse of children within an institution. This is the solution that they have put forward using experts, and so we can use the available framework that's there, because one of those points, I think it's number 2 for Victoria, because the different states have them in different order, but I think, and certainly the national principles call for informing children of their rights. Victoria takes it one step forward, on paper at least, and says empower children by their rights. So that's really important. Well, how do we do that? Are we expecting the institutions to self-govern? Well, that was the problem in the first place. Yeah. That was the problem that the Royal Commission was trying to solve. And we've had so many witnesses that bore their hearts and souls out for that commission. Incredible amount of, it was a national thing. It was monumental. This is the solution for opening that door. Does that answer the question?
I've got a bit of an answer to that as well. I just think it's pure professional curiosity. I mean, these children do leave the compounds or the houses or whatever, and I just think about all the scenarios that we were in growing up, out on the street, proselytizing, giving out tracts, asking for money. We were trafficked on the street, traveling overseas by ourselves when we were 14, 15 years old. There was just like so many times that people around in airports could say, that's wrong, that's weird, that's strange, Someone walking into Centrelink, I have a friend, she grew up overseas, Australian, that's her only citizenship, weird accents. We've all got strange accents, culties, we call it. There's just a lot of things that you can pick up on. Someone walking into school for the first time and they don't exist. Like, where did this kid come from? And walking into Centrelink, and like, we've never seen a citizenship document like this. Like, it's just about every time they're out and they're in the community, like, people are looking out. And the more we can actually do these public campaigns, the more people are going to start seeing the signs of really child trafficking and abuse and closed communities. And I think that's so important, and not just kind of looking at this alternative lifestyle facade and kind of being like curious for it, but actually realizing, it's signs of abuse and coercive control. You'll see it in their body language, and each cult has a different culture. If you see someone that just comes from a completely different culture and it just doesn't make a lot of sense, their stories and stuff, even being really socially weird and awkward. We were talking last night after a glass of wine about all the weird things that we did when we left, because you're just so unsocialized, and we're like, we just did so many weird things that put ourselves in a huge amount of risk. I know, over 47% went straight into domestic violence. That was common. So many people have told me they were raped as well right after they left, because it's just, you don't have any boundaries, protection, no family, no knowledge of the real world. So it's just kind of like looking out and sort of seeing it. I think there's going to be a helpful person that takes that person under their wing, and it's going to be the change. And that's why we actually want to go into these communities, like outreach, and say, you want to keep these kids, that's fine, but they want to leave here as a pamphlet, you need to make sure that they come to us and we will support them in their transition. It's like a refugee. We have more funding going into people leaving jail, you know, all sorts of things. But these kids coming out from just being worked to the bone their whole life, exploited, having no family and protection, and then they're just thrown out into the wolves, into the world with no knowledge of how to exist.
Marie, may I ask you one small question? You mentioned all of these young children being put out to work. You mentioned that you were working at the age of 2. Can you just expand on that a little bit, please? What did they do to you to make you be employable at 2?
Yes, it's a weird question, isn't it? Well, the Children of God, you can probably look it up, and there's tons of videos and lots of, like, we were taught how to act and sing. And so I moved to the Philippines when I was 1 with my family, and at points we were there on our own, like with no parents whatsoever in these massive communes. We were out singing. I was a sweet little blonde kid being like squeezed all the time. They were giving lots of money to us, and there was sexual videos being made. I don't want to go into it, but there was every form of exploitation of children making money for the cult. Everything was about, you know, us being kind of martyred or sacrificed at the Lamb. The Abraham story, not to bring in religion. We don't want to bring religion at all into this. But yeah, that's just kind of like a thing that people think, like, I need to I know parents that have given their children to be raped, and like to the guru or to the leaders as a sacrifice. And I think that's our biggest thing. We're like, you cannot sacrifice your child as martyrs for your ideological beliefs. You just can't.
You cannot own another human being, and it doesn't matter the age of that body. You know, that person, that child, doesn't matter their age. You cannot own them, and they can't be, you know, just collateral damage of participation in things that are not safe for children. Placing them there places them at risk. Going back to addressing the entry into institution, the rule is very clear that any organization which provides services to children is an organization that has to be governed by the child safety standards, create a child safety culture, and empowers them by their rights. So it really is the pathway into the institution. If there are children inside there, then the government has a right to represent and have and empower the children by their rights, represent them, their safety, and have an entryway in there. So I mean, it could even be as simple as, you know, someone who is a specialist in safeguarding children. Why can't they go and sit in at a a Sunday service, or a what do they call them in Jehovah's Witness? A meeting, go in and sit in a meeting, or let's have a look at your materials. Like, okay, let's open this book.
Dive deeper, yeah. And I know when we were raided that there was trunks of material that was taken, and it's all sexually explicit material it's grooming material we were looking at. I put some in the submission, and I'm sorry you had to see that, but I did want to show the graphic nature of the material we were seeing our whole lives, and of course lots of things in real life that we were seeing and being exposed to. So yeah, you got to dive deeper. Like, cults are so good at having that facade of the shiny, happy people. Mm-hmm. And like, that's another thing with a cult survivor. You might see them smiling and like maybe the glassy eyed, and you just need Jesus, you know? And it's like, just because someone is smiling and the kids don't have dirt on their face and dad doesn't have a beer in hand, and that doesn't necessarily mean abuse. Like, abuse can mean extreme authoritarian control and kids who are incredibly well-behaved and silent and maybe even dissociated. It's very common. Actually, that's the number one symptom that most people report is disassociation because of like these crazy exorcisms and speaking in tongues and these auditing, just these things that kids are exposed to, that your mind just goes into like this state. And that's how you survive, really. So.
And the thing is, yeah, like for example, in supermarkets, we don't allow for pornographic material to be, available. There are only certain places where that's allowed to be sold. And so why is this happening inside of these closed groups where no one can intervene and no one can see what's happening, and this kind of material is being supplied to children in a sustained way? There's also, for example, in Jehovah's Witness, there are a number of, and again, I'm going to do a supplementary submission, but talking about child safety and child protection, for example, the elders are the only ones that, since the Royal Commission, how they have reformed is to require the elders to have the working with children check. But the elders are also the ones that are doing these judicial committees where they're sitting across from children and asking them, how did they touch themselves? And they want to know explicit details. What did you do? Where did you put your hand? How long did you do it for? For example, if a child or a young person had a sexual interaction with somebody of their own age, for example, they want to discover who was at fault, who was the sinful one. So they will ask in great detail, like who kissed who, when did it start, how did you do it, where did you put your hand, where did they put their hand, then what did you do, and did you like it? This is 3 men with a working with children check card, ticket to children. It's a ticket to children, and then everyone steps back and goes, oh, well, if they got that ticket, it's like, hang on, well, can't you just have a look at what they're actually doing?
That's why you have to look at the practices. It's so important, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll hand over to Christine for one last question. Chris.
Thank you both so much for your contribution. We really appreciate it. You argue that the religious freedom cannot override a child's right to safety and education. How should policymakers balance these competing rights, and are there any examples, Australia or internationally, where the Olive Leaf Network view this balance has not been struck effectively?
Okay. There's no competition there, in my opinion. In the law, it's the best interests of the child is the primary consideration, so that is the go-to. There is no competition there. It's the primary consideration. That means it is above that religious freedom, because we have a role in ensuring their safety and protection, well-being, and healthy development. So I don't see those as conflicting freedoms and rights. The law and the set of rights for the Convention on the Rights of the Child is very clear in how it's prioritized.
Yeah. And religious rights is an individual right. And it's just like hearing it talked about a group right all the time doesn't make sense to me. It's not a group's right to have people as their slaves for life. The child also has that individual right. If they don't want to go to the meeting, then they've got the right to say, I don't want to. I don't want to sit there for 4 or 5 hours learning about death and damnation or whatever. So I think that's important, but there was a case I think we brought up in our Olive Leaf network where, a parent was forcing their child to proselytize on the streets and hand out pamphlets, and it was told that that's not okay. Was it?
So this is in the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it was 1949. It was a Jehovah's Witness case where it's Prince versus Massachusetts. And it was about a caregiver who was on the streets with her niece and her own children, where they were distributing the Watchtower. The state convicted Prince of child labor, And she appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that, and her argument was religious freedom trumps the state's enforcement of the protections of the child. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that no, that is not the case, that the state has a right to enforce restrictions, which is for the protection of the child. And they said that in the statement that a parent does not have the right to martyr their child, and the child must wait until they are of an age, have reached adulthood where they can make that decision for themselves. So it's not the parent's right to cause a child to suffer or to be harmed. A child cannot be made a martyr.
Thank you. We are going to have to conclude today's hearing here.
Yeah.
Before we do so, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
There is. There's a very special poem. I might not get through it. It's written by Cheryl Bottenheimer. She's a child survivor of the Exclusive Brethren. I want to unzip my body right here and right now, in front of you, in front of the jury, in front of every person who's ever asked, "Are you sure it happened? Why didn't you say something sooner? Do you have any proof?" No, I don't have proof. I have a body that remembers every inch of those hands. I have a skin that flinches when the air shifts just right. I have a rib cage that tightens like it still knows the weight of the silence. If you want proof, let me unzip my body. Let me peel back the flesh. Let me reveal the places they touched, even before I had the words for what they were stealing. That lodged itself between my legs before I knew how to say stop. I will show you the truth. It's screaming in my nervous system. The courtroom carved into every tendon, every tremor. Don't ask for tidy stories. Don't ask for police reports from a time I couldn't spell my own name. Ask my hips why they lock up in the dark. Ask my stomach why it turns when I hear footsteps behind me, or change jingling in a pocket. Ask my body. It kept the minutes, even when no one else would. This isn't about believing me anymore. It's about believing in justice. Justice that doesn't wait for the perfect victim or a time-stamped photo. It's about holding children like sacred fire, too precious to risk, too human to doubt, and too valuable to silence. If I unzip my body, let it spill every unspoken truth, and then zip it back up. With steel, thread, and fire. It's not to prove myself. It's not for your belief. It's for the ones who are still silent. It's for the ones still hoping that someone will listen. It's for the children who should never have to unzip theirs just to be protected. So I didn't read it at the beginning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria and Miriam, for appearing before the committee today and for your powerful contribution to this inquiry. We appreciate the time and effort that you've taken to prepare your evidence and your written submission, and we acknowledge the significance of your testimony. You'll be provided with a proof version of today's transcript to check, and verified transcripts will be published on the committee's website. We will take a short break before we resume for our next witness, and I declare this hearing adjourned. Thank you.